Guys, Bitcoin is having a move to the downside right here after going up for 6 consecutive days in a row. The only other time we saw this was actually right here when we formed this bear flag pattern, when we went up for 8 consecutive days before a larger correction to the downside. Now, we discussed this yesterday, so this should not come to a surprise, and I'm happy that the correction was predicted correctly actually. So it's important to watch the daily videos, of course. Without further ado, what do I think will happen next? Well, I think just quick summary for you guys. I think we go down a bit more and then we go up here, retest this 70s, 67 to 70s, and then go down. But now let me explain why basically. So if we go on the weekly, I want to talk about the cyclicality in this video a bit more. And we can see there's a lot of that cyclicality really, because the 4-year cycles, they do repeat, and that's really crazy how they repeat every single time, and that's what's going to happen right now again. So let's see what happened the last few times. Well, we have to look into July kind of. So July kind of, in May we went down. So this is 2018. May we went down, formed that bottom, and then had that peak to the upside in July, forming the top somewhere in August, before eventually going further down, one last big correction to the downside, forming the bottom of the bear market. 2021, last bear market, same thing. June we went down, and then we had July, we had that move to the upside, topping out somewhere in August, and then we moved down, one last move to the downside. And the same thing we can see right now, obviously. June we went down, right? We found the bottom in June. Now July is going up, and then somewhere we'll find the top in end of July to August, and then we'll go back down towards the downside. Now that happens every single time. Now let me add some lines and we can see why really I think the cyclicality does repeat. But first of all, the 200 weekly moving average, simple weekly moving average line, we can see that we're trading just around this line right now. And historically, we can see last cycle, we actually did a very similar thing. We went down here, we went just above the 200 weekly and then went below. So I think similar thing can be happening now, from that bottom somewhere below the 200 weekly moving average line. The cycle before that, we did touch the 200 weekly moving average line. So now what do I want to talk about next? The next chart is important. So this is the next chart. This line is the 21 simple moving average on the weekly. And after we go down here in June, form that high in July, August, and then go down, we can see 2018, we retested the 21 weekly moving average, okay? Retested it perfectly, kind of went slightly above, but we retested it and then went eventually down. And also here, 2021, we went up, we almost retested it, the 21 week simple moving average line, and we went down. Right now, I think a similar thing can be playing out, whereby we retest this 21 weekly moving average line. Of course, this line over time will drag towards the downside. And right now, this line sits at around about $69,000 to $70,000. So I think we can retest this line, potentially go slightly higher, but that is one of the important factors to consider. So now I went on the daily chart and we can still see the same line. This is the 21 weekly moving average line, which we kind of found as resistance in 2018. So this is 2018, guys. And this is basically where we are right now. End of June, we found the bottom. We went, but before we retested it, and that's why I think we can go a bit lower right here, before we retest the 70s, we actually created a higher low. And that's what we did right here. We went down slightly for a few days before eventually going to the upside. And the same thing is essentially happening right here. Basically, here is the 21 weekly moving average line, form that low, and right now we could be forming a higher low before eventually going back to the upside and retesting that line. So the same thing that has happened in 2018 could be happening again. And I think we can continue the move to the downside slightly. And then right here, I have actually 200 daily moving average line. This line, of course, acted as crucial resistance right here at $82,000 and was one of the core principles towards our short position, which we printed nicely on the move to the downside. Now, if I go to 2018, and yes, this line is above. So the 200 weekly moving average line is below, and this is 200 daily moving average line. So it is a different line, it's above. And we can see in 2018, basically this is where we are, right? We created that higher low, which I just mentioned, and then we somewhat retested, we didn't quite reach it, but we somewhat retested the 200 daily simple moving average line, which we could reach towards that level. Now, I'm not saying necessarily that level, because it is a bit higher than the 21 weekly, which we just mentioned, which was at like 70,000, right? The 200 daily, which we're on right now, is around $74,000. And over time, of course, this line goes down because Bitcoin is trading down. So the average is also trading down. So if we form that high somewhere in August, maybe at that time, if we go down here, go back up, We also the 200, so the 21 weekly moving is somewhere like here. We could find that top somewhere in this region, and that will lay somewhere in this region, like around $70,000, depending on how these moving averages move. But I think that is pretty much the play here going forward. Now, if I actually go onto the smaller time frame, so let me go onto the 4 hourly, we can see kind of the lines that I drew and what I mentioned yesterday. And we can see right here that yesterday I basically, let me remove this line here. Basically yesterday I mentioned that, look, we can go down. We had 6 consecutive daily green candles. We can go down slightly. And I mentioned this level specifically, but I think we can also go here and retest the 60s. Now, I want to show you the liquidation heat map because that is important to note. If I go here on the 1 weekly liquidation heat map, we can see a big chunk of liquidity laying here around $60,500. And that is of course the weekly. And I think that will bring us somewhere here in this range of this previous support and resistance. We could go there before eventually going higher and thereby creating this higher low structure, just like we did in 2018. So that is essentially the play for me right now. I'm not going to do anything. I want to wait and then probably scale into a short position, probably starting from this range on the top, $67,000 until maybe $70,000 with 4 entries. But of course, I will share everything with you guys. And this chart is very nice to look at. Basically, I just mentioned that we had this relief rally in July, right? In 2018 and then in 2022 in the bear markets, we had that relief in July going into August and then that dump. And you can see right here, we had in 2018 a 47% relief, in 2022 a 36% relief. And given, of course, that the Bitcoin volatility is reducing, if we have slightly less of a move to the upside, so maybe 24%, I think that can play out. So this will bring us somewhere in the region of $70,000 to $72,000 within the next couple of weeks. And I very much agree with what Ted is saying over here. And I think that can happen. And let's see, let it play out. I mean, if it does, I'll be very happy. I hope you guys will print nicely. And here we can also just confirm that. I mean, if you look at the monthly returns, we can see basically July generally very positive for Bitcoin, right? Average returns 7.5%, median return 8% in July. And we can see also, if you go to the last bear market 2022, May and June were negative, just like we did right now, just as we had right now. May and June were negative. Even this cycle, right? May and June were very negative these last 2 months. And then most importantly, August and September in the last bear market 2022 were negative. And I think the same thing can happen now. If you go back 4 years again to the 2018 2018 bear market, just like what we discussed right now, right? May and June were negative, July 21% up, and then August and September were very negative. If we go to 2014, yes, July was negative. However, August and September again were very negative. So just like in 2018, just like in 2022, and just like I think it will also be the case in August after we find that resistance around the $70,000 region, we'll have that relief up to there and then we go down. But of course, I think like I just mentioned, I think we can go a bit lower, then go higher, and that's just how the market works, right? So we also have a hidden bearish divergence here. So it's actually not it looks like a bullish divergence, yes, but it's actually a hidden bearish divergence whereby we have a lower high, not a higher low. And this is of course a bearish sign. And we can see right here many factors playing into the idea that we're going a bit lower before that relief into end of this month and going of course higher. And we can see this right here. Basically today Trump said that the MOU between the US and Iran is over. There was some new attacks happening and that of course pushed the price of Bitcoin further down. Bitcoin dropped below $62,000 and I think we could retest these levels right here at the bottom. And I believe these levels are approximately, what are they? Around about 60s to mid 60s. And that of course aligns perfectly with our liquidation heat map going into these 60s levels before we go further to the upside. And finally, let's look at the 2 weekly liquidation heat map. We can see here that actually the biggest chunk of liquidity lies around about like $57,500. So this 60.5 which you just discussed liquidation level is not that big if you compare it to this big liquidation level just below the previous lows. And of course, if we go on the daily here, we can see that that level is exactly here below the lows. And here, let me draw out what I think will happen. Go down here to the mid 60s, 60.5, retest this level at 70, something like that, and then that big move to the downside into, of course, September, October, find that bottom somewhere in October, and we'll most likely find that bottom somewhere around about this green dotted line, which we have been trading across, and this will bring us, in my opinion, to around about the low 50s for Bitcoin to be bottoming out in October. With that being said, hope you guys like the insight. See you tomorrow and bye.